CO level monitoring in a parking garage. There is a parking garage with a maximum of 200 spaces and with 2 entrance and 2 exit gates. The task is to generate an alarm and switch on the ventilation when there are more than 100 cars in the parking garage. The ventilation must also be switched on when the CO level reaches a certain value. And when this occurs, the Pager8 will receive a dry contact from the CO sensor or the CO detection system. Let's see how we can configure this. We will use input number 1 to detect the dry contact from the CO sensor, and this will generate an alarm and will turn the ventilation on using a relay output. We will use input 2 and input 3 to detect the dry contact from the photobeam sensors installed on the entrance gates. So with this, we will count the number of cars coming in the parking garage. We will use input 4 and 5 to detect the dry contact from the photobeam sensors installed on the exit gates. So we will use this to count the leaving cars. Now let's start to configure this. We need some more inputs with switch type first. This will likely be normally closed switch, but now I'm selecting normally open switch just not to generate an alarm because I have a normally open switch on the input right now. Okay, and these are already normally open switches. Okay. We can also add a name to the inputs. So this will be the CO sensor. Exit 1 and exit 2 sensors. Now, so what happens if the CO sensor sends an alarm? In this case, we need to generate an alarm and turn on the ventilation. Okay, so generate alarm and relay close. Let's say we will rename the relays. Okay, so now it shows ventilation, and let's turn the ventilation on for, I don't know, 1 hour. Of course, ventilation can be also turned off using another event or another action. Okay, let's see the entry beam sensors and exit beam sensors. We have to add off. Exit 1 and exit 2. Okay, entry beam sensors need to increment the value of the register, and exit sensors need to decrement the value of the registers. This way we will count the incoming and leaving vehicles. Increment register by 1. Increment same register by 1. Okay, and the exits will decrement the register. Okay, now we have a problem. We do not know in advance how many cars are in the parking garage when we install the system. So for this, we will configure security setting, safety setting. So if the value of the register is less than 0, we will reset it to 0. At the end of the day, probably all cars will leave and the parking garage will be empty. And with this setting, the value of the register will be for sure 0 by the end of the day. Of course, if we know how many cars are inside, we can set the number of the cars in the register. We can use the action test event for this. For example, we can set the register value. Let's say we know that there are 95 cars in the car park. And if you press the action test button, this event will occur and will set the register to 95. Now, if we check the register value, we can see that it is 0. And if we go back and click on the action test, now we can see that it is 95. Now I will delete it because it's not necessary. So we need to reset the register to 0 if it goes below 0. How do we do that? Using the register below limit. So if it goes below 0, in that case, set register value back to 0. Okay, and now if the value of the register is higher than 100, which means that we have at least 100 cars in the parking garage, we need to generate an alarm and turn the ventilation on. How do we do that? Register over limit, same register, 100, add event, generate alarm, and turn ventilation on. Now, just to demonstrate, I will turn ventilation on for just 5 seconds. Let me share the screen of my phone again. Okay, so we have input 2 and 3, which will increment the register. And when it reaches 100, the ventilation relay should turn on and an alarm should occur. Let's see. Okay, 101 cars, and we have an alarm, and the ventilation has switched on for 5 seconds.